When we think about Egypt, we can't help but talk about the Great Pyramids and the ancient structures that have made significant marks in history. However, the customs and traditions of the ancient Egyptians are full of weird and creepy practices that are considered grim by today's standards. From ingesting gold to mourning cats with shaved eyebrows, the ancient Egyptians' way of life will leave you mesmerized and terrified at the same time. These are the 15 most terrifying things that were normal in ancient Egypt and their cultural significance. Number 15, ingesting gold. Let's face it, no one wants to die. If we could, we would all live forever. And the same goes for the ancient Egyptians. However, the Egyptians decided to take things too far. Imagine someone eating 24-karat gold today. That's crazy, right? And to think that this practice was the most normal way to live back in the 3000 BC, well, they didn't ingest gold because they had too much. It was simply because they believed that gold was the skin and flesh of the gods. You must know that the ancient Egyptians were big on their religious beliefs. This is why they consumed gold for mental, bodily, and spiritual purification, and therefore saw gold as a gateway to immortality. The noblemen of the time used gold to decorate the foods of their guests just to impress them. And this practice soon made gold scarce in the country to the point that the ruling king had to pass a law that limited the consummation of gold per serving. Even if you believe that gold can really make you immortal, don't try this in the presence of anyone or things might end up really ugly. Number 14, cannibalism. This next one is really terrifying. You must be warned. In case you do not know what cannibalism means, it is the act of a human eating the flesh or organs of other humans. Scary, right? Yeah, the ancient Egyptians did that, or maybe not. From what we know, the earliest corpus of texts comes from the pyramids of kings and queens, and in these pyramid texts, carved on the walls of the tombs, is a puzzling and unsettling passage called the Cannibal Hymn. This passage talks about an ancient king called Unas, who grew to be a soul-devouring king in his afterlife. According to the passage that states, Unas is the bull of heaven, who rages in his heart, who lives on the being of every god, who eats their entrails. This is where the belief that the ancient Egyptians practiced cannibalism started, but can we agree that this is enough evidence of cannibalism? Although there is no evidence to support the claims that King Unas did devour the body parts of other gods and kings, there is little or no reason for the writer of the pyramid texts to make such claims without evidence. If they did engage in cannibalism for real, then that's totally creepy. Number 13, fertility festival. Fertility festival is something done in different parts of the world, but here it takes a little more meaning than anywhere else. Also called the Opet festival, it was done in the second month of the lunar calendar. Done in celebration of Opet, the Egyptians would make the god Amun, his wife Mut, and their son Kon make a ritual journey from their shrines to the temple of Luxor. The scene of the festival, carved during Tutankhamun's reign in 1333 BCE to 23 BCE, shows priests carrying statues of Amun, Mut, and Khons in barks through the streets of ancient Thebes, from there to river barges and onto Luxor. Following this appearance to the populace, the statues remained in the temple of Luxor for about 24 days, during which the city remained in festival. The images were then returned by the same route to their shrines in Karnak in a second public appearance that closed the festival. But how did this ever have anything to do with fertility? Through its association with Mut, the name Opet also applied to a local city goddess known as Thebes, who was depicted in a way similar to the hippopotamus goddess of fertility and childbirth called Tuart. For anyone who needed to cure their infertility, the Opet festival was much anticipated. Number 12, incestous marriage. You have probably heard about families who practiced incest and felt like it was improper. While it is something unacceptable in this age, the ancient Egyptians saw it as the normal way of life. If you try to discuss this with 10 of your friends, most likely half of them won't believe you because it is just weird. But that was how the ancient Egyptians lived their lives. Both people from the royal families and the common men practiced incestuous marriages. During the time the Romans controlled Egypt from 30 BC to AD 395, brother-sister marriages occurred frequently. For the royal family, this practice may have reflected religious beliefs, as pharaohs even married their daughters. In case you are still in doubt, let's look at examples of Egyptian rulers who were recorded to have married their relatives. We start with Senwosret first, who reigned circa 1961 BC to 1917 BC. He was married to his sister Neferu. Next is Amenhotep I, who reigned circa 1525 BC to 1504 BC and was married to his sister Amosi Meritamun. Even if you're not familiar with any of the above mentioned, you will know about the controversial Egyptian Queen Cleopatra VII, who reigned circa 51 BC to 30 BC. One of her husbands, Ptolemy XIV, was her biological brother. There are only a few of those who had incestuous marriages, as it was considered normal in the past. For any reason at all, would you marry your sibling? Number 11. Cat mourning. What is so special about mourning an animal? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Until you hear about how the Egyptians mourned their cats. We all love our animals, especially when this animal is your pet. You want them to live forever. But the ancient Egyptians took the life and death of their pets to another level. You may have heard that the ancient Egyptians worshipped many animals and revered them for different reasons. That's very correct. For example, dogs were valued for their ability to protect and hunt. But cats were not just cats. They were the most special animal to them. Egyptians believed cats were magical creatures, capable of bringing good luck to the people who housed them. With this belief, we don't need a record or study to show that almost every house would have done everything to get a cat or two. Who doesn't want good luck? These treasured pets even had spiritual significance back in those days. According to Egyptian mythology, gods and goddesses had that great power that made them transform into any animal of their choice. However, not every deity could transform themselves into cats. None. Except the goddess named Bastet. It was really outstanding that a beautiful temple was built in the city of Perbast, where people come from all over to witness its splendor. This is one of the reasons why cats were treated specially. Wealthy families dressed them in jewels and fed them treats fit for royalty. Woe betide anyone that mistakenly killed them. And when the cats died naturally, they were mummified. What next? Mourning. And that was done by shaving off the eyebrows. The owners would continue to mourn the cat until their eyebrows grew back. This means if your eyebrows take forever to grow, you'll have to mourn your cat forever. How amazing! Number 10. Retainer sacrifice. Just as the ancient Egyptians had a strong belief about animals, they also had different strange beliefs about the afterlife. If you believe that there is a life after death, then you're not different from the Egyptians. Just that the Egyptians' beliefs about the afterlife come with a twist. They believe that every human has a ka, meaning spirit. And this spirit is what leaves the body after death, only to find a host to live in after death. The host is none other than the skeleton. This explains why they chose to mummify their corpse just for the ka to have a place to return. Where does the spirit go after death? Let's not go off course, we are here for the retainer sacrifice. Now, the bodies of the royalties were treated differently. Of course, they were not buried the same way. And since it was believed that any dead human would continue to live their lives in the afterlife, it was decided that the kings be buried with their slaves who would continue to serve them in the afterlife. Not only the pharaohs, but also other high court aristocracy would have slaves slaughtered after the pharaohs died, so they may continue to serve them in the afterlife. This practice is known as a retainer sacrifice. This practice is weird, right? And yes, not just weird, but terrifying too. Well, no Egyptian in the past saw it as such, as it was done to demonstrate the strength of the kings and noblemen. Thankfully, this practice only existed during the first dynasty, as it gradually declined till it vanished. Number 9. Pregnancy and birth customs. When it comes to ensuring the safety of mother and child during delivery, the Egyptians went spiritual. While we use the help of medicine today and commit our safety to the hands of a doctor, they welcomed childbirth with ritual, using medico-magical spells, amulets, and various other objects to help ensure the survival of mother and child. Objects used in childbirth rituals took many forms. For example, a Middle Kingdom magical birth brick was discovered by the Penn Museum in South Abydos, which was used to support the mother during labor. This brick depicts images of protective demons as well as a scene of a mother holding her child, flanked by midwives. Such imagery also occurs on contemporary Egyptian ivory birth wands, which function to protect newborns. Archaeologists have also discovered figurines that may relate to birth and fertility, which include bed figurines, which depict a nude woman on a bed, and model beds, which do not have human figures. Women are also seen on beds or with materials that are dedicated to temples and shrines. Number 8. Pharaohs' dwarf. While the short stature of dwarves is one of the hindrances to living a better life today, in the past, the ancient Egyptians' dwarves were held in high esteem. Dwarfs in those times attained high positions in society. Some served as assistants to the pharaoh, while others were looked up to as gods. In the ancient necropolises of Giza and Saqqara, Dwarves hailing from various professions were depicted on at least 50 tombs. They included jewelry makers, animal or pet handlers, fishermen, entertainers, dancers, nurses, and midwives. Some even held more important positions. But why were they revered more than humans with bigger stature? The honor of the dwarves in ancient Egypt is highlighted by the praise and honor heaped upon Harkhuf, an army general and a high-profile official who served 2 pharaohs when he returned from an African expedition with precious treasures and a pygmy who performed exotic dances. The pharaoh at the time, who was a child, was so delighted by this last acquisition that he appointed people to guard the pygmy on his ship voyage back to Egypt, lest he fall into the water. The ancient Egyptians also worshipped several dwarf gods. An example is Ptah, a deity associated with regeneration and rejuvenation, and who was also worshipped as the creator of the universe, was sometimes portrayed as a dwarf. Another god, Bees, who was associated with love, sexuality, and childbirth, was also portrayed as a dwarf. This god was important to women of childbearing age, as he's the one they shout to during birth to help them with delivery. One particular prayer, called the Spell of the Dwarf, was meant to be spoken 4 times over a clay dwarf by a woman in labor. This spell went, "O good dwarf, come because of the one who sent you. Come down, placenta. Come down, placenta. Come down." I'm guessing it worked for them, because if it didn't, it wouldn't have been passed from generation to generation. Next time you meet a dwarf, honor them. They are the descendants of important gods. Number 7. Funerary texts. It is no news that the ancient Egyptians put a lot of work into their funerary traditions. We have discussed the retainer's sacrifice, but that's not all. Starting from mummification, which ensures the spirit has where to live, to the funerary texts that guide the spirits through their afterlife journey, the ancient Egyptians do the most. The earliest funerary texts of the Old Kingdom were the pyramid texts, found inscribed in the burial chambers and antechambers of pyramids built for kings. They were spells written in simple hieroglyphs that described the king's journey. The pyramid texts were reserved for kings, but by the Middle Kingdom, the texts had evolved into the coffin texts, which were accessible to anyone wealthy enough to afford a coffin. The coffin texts included more than 1,000 spells that were inscribed and painted on coffins. They included the offering frieze, depicting all the funerary gifts given to the deceased, and the Book of Two Ways, with a map of the underworld showing the 2 routes, land and water, to the home of the god Osiris. There were different books, but the most notable is the Book of Emerging Forth into the Light, commonly known as the Book of the Dead. The spells in the book were a mixture of old ones from the pyramid and coffin texts and new compositions, and they contained detailed instructions for the funeral rites, along with a wealth of information about the underworld. But why exactly did the ancient Egyptians put their all into funerary tradition? Were they obsessed with death? Probably not. It looks more like an obsession with life. What do you think? Number 6. Dental care. You probably won't like this one. The ancient Egyptians were afflicted with dental problems. The most common was attrition, which was caused by their diet of uncooked vegetables and lack of necessary vitamins and minerals. According to what archaeologists found, skulls and jaws in burial shafts and tombs all show signs of the disease. They are so serious that if untreated, it could lead to abscesses, inflammation of the jawbone, gums, and tooth loss. The ancient Egyptians had bad dental hygiene, which was partly due to their bread having grit and sand in it, which wore away their enamel. And while they hadn't established dentistry at the time, they created an unbelievable formula for toothpaste. They crushed rock, mint, salt, pepper, and dried iris flowers to create a tooth-cleaning powder. Looking at the combination, it's something you don't want to try on your gums, right? Of course, it caused bleeding gums, but they used it anyway. That was not the only mouthwash they used. They had others that had to be chewed and spit out. Mouthwashes were made up of ingredients such as bran and celery, and some included more active ingredients. This mouthwash provided the patient with some form of pain relief from toothache and other oral pains. Others were just for the precise purpose of preserving a healthy mouth and teeth. And if you think dental braces are something new, you should ask the ancient Egyptians. The dental braces date back to as far as the Egyptian period. Archaeologists have discovered mummies with crude metal bands around their teeth and believe that the bands were used to create pressure to move around the teeth. It was also found that lost teeth were reattached using silver or gold wire to the neighboring teeth. But one thing we do not know is if they did this procedure before or after death. You know, you never can tell the extent these people went when it came to their dead bodies. Although these techniques are outdated, they are basics for the modern procedures that we know. So don't be quick to call it weird. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Look at this image carefully. What do you think was going on here? This image is weird and at the same time confusing. We are really not going to talk about the fact that there's something bizarre going on in this image. A tale of the unimaginable surfaced in an unexpected area. As you can see, something is definitely not right, and no one seems to be alarmed. If you think this is just a representation of an artist's wild imagination, then you should keep watching this video as we will discuss this image and what it might actually represent in a bit. Number 5. Menstruation. A very long time ago, when the ancient Egyptians' medical world was full of darkness, the nation was hit with a disease whose symptoms ended up getting celebrated. Crazy, right? This disease is none other than schistosomiasis, a chronic disease caused by parasites. The common sign of this disease is blood in urine, which is something that should scare anyone, but the ancient Egyptians actually did not see it the way every other person would. These ancient humans actually believed these weird symptoms to be a form of menstruation, especially among the uneducated. Let's agree that women can believe this, but what about the men? Thanks to education, we can know early in our lives that men do not menstruate, but to these people, they perceive the signs of schistosomiasis as the sign of fertility. They had believed that any man who peed blood urine was fertile and ready for fatherhood. It was so crazy that they celebrated it whenever anyone reported that they peed blood with their urine. It is not clear how these people were able to live with this disease they pampered instead of fighting against, but it sure took them so many years to realize they had been fooling themselves for too long. Funny or scary? Number 4. Servants covered in honey. The ancient Egyptian slaves had seen too much trouble, especially the ones that served Pepi II, a young Egyptian pharaoh who ascended the throne at the tender age of 6. Perhaps it was this privileged upbringing that ultimately resulted in him being one of Egypt's more demanding kings. He was the king who ordered the capture of a dancing pygmy for his entertainment, and crazy enough, he insisted his slaves coat themselves in honey to keep flies away from him. Pepi II. Neferkare was the son of Pepi I, who reigned from 2278 BC. His mother is Ankhesenepepi II, who served as regent while Pepi II was still a minor. He is usually mentioned as the longest reigning monarch in history, with some sources citing a 94-year reign. However, other sources indicate it was 64 years. Regardless, Pepi II served as the king of Egypt for a very long time. Aside from his long years on the throne, he was known for some very crazy demands. A preserved letter that Pepi II wrote to Harkhuf, a governor of Aswan, and the head of one of the expeditions Pepi II sent into Nubia, shows that Pepi II had requested a dancing pygmy be captured politely and brought back to entertain the court. If there was anything he really hated, it was flies. And because flies were around, he ordered that his slaves be coated in honey to serve as fly traps, essentially attracting swarms of flies away from him and towards their honey-coated bodies. Generally, Egyptians do not like flies like Pepi II. In fact, due to the insect's swiftness and unwavering persistence, the fly came to be held in high esteem, a symbol of both persistence and tenacity. Goldy flies were then used as medals for soldiers who displayed excellent qualities on the battleground. Also, fly amulets were crafted from gold, silver, or bone, and some of the best examples of gold fly pendants were found in the tomb of Queen Ahotep at Dra Abu el Naga in the Theban necropolis. It is not clear whether wearing a fly amulet was only a symbol of excellence or whether it was to give protection from insect bites or to ward off flies. Whatever that was about, it sure was better than coating other people with honey. Number 3. Healing with moldy bread. We really need to give accolades to the ancient Egyptians for their profound contributions to science, medicine, and culture. But this particular innovation can be somehow strange. They pioneered the use of moldy bread and honey as a remarkable antibiotic to treat wounds. While we take moldy breads and trash them today, they have saved lives and healed wounds in the past. Who would have thought moldy breads were ever useful? Such unconventional remedies highlight the ingenuity and forward thinking of this ancient civilization. Their knowledge is one thing that has continued to intrigue modern researchers, But how did they even think about something that's supposed to be a waste as an antibiotic? This discovery was probably accidental but definitely revolutionary. Observant ancient physicians noticed that certain types of mold growing on bread could lead to beneficial effects when applied to wounds. Believe it or not, this early understanding of antibiotics laid the foundation for future medical advancements. To our biggest surprise, the application of moldy bread on wounds proved remarkably effective. The mold produced penicillin, which inhibited bacterial growth and prevented infections. While there was nothing like penicillin the way we have it everywhere today, the ancient Egyptians' simple technique made a lot of wounded individuals survive. You may not like it, but yeah, it's a lifesaver. Number 2. Bread and beer as currencies. No, we aren't done with bread, but this time it's not here as a medicine, but instead as currency. Before using coins, the ancient Egyptian society used different forms of money, such as non-coin forms of silver and gold currency, in the form of silver rings and gold pieces shaped like sheep. They used these for centuries before minting coins out of the metals. The earliest forms of money in Egypt were not based on metals, but rather based on a barter exchange of everyday goods. Ancient Egyptian governments centralized harvests in state warehouses. Grain harvesters would deposit their grain into the central warehouses for security and convenience. The depositors could then withdraw a particular lot of grain when they wanted to make a purchase. Sometimes the deposits into these Egyptian grain banks were voluntary, and other times it was required by the king. Written orders for grain withdrawal could be used to pay tax collectors, priests, and merchants. Ancient Egyptian society practiced a complex barter system of cashless exchange. People would gather in public marketplaces to exchange their goods with one another, and of all the things they used as currency was bread and beer. What you get depends on the loaf and jar of beer that you have brought forward. It is just so funny to think that the bread we take for granted today was once used as money so many years ago. Number 1. Ancestor veneration. Lastly, we talk about the Egyptians and their dead once again. This practice is known as the cult of the dead, a practice that is prominent in ancient Egypt, but generally involves a person securing an afterlife, either for themselves or for immediate relations. Objects related to the deceased are used for these rituals, such as the ancestors' busts. A special place is therefore dedicated to the dead family members of a household. The busts are used to represent the deceased in the afterlife, and every time they want to remember the dead, they go to the place for remembrance. The most monumental examples are 2 fine busts excavated in an Egyptian site. One was inscribed with the name of the father and invoking the god Shu, the other with the name of the mother and invoking the goddess Tefnet. The reference to the 2 deities implies that each bust represented the 2 lines, male and female, right back to the dawn of creation. According to Egyptian myth, Shu and Tefnet are the first sons and daughters of the creator, the sun god Ra. This practice may seem meaningless today, but it was one of the practices the ancient Egyptians put a lot of resources and effort into. What do you think about this practice? Let us know in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.